Hello, everyone. Today we have something incredibly exciting coming to D&D Beyond. That's the Lord of the Rings role-playing game. This compendium is now available on D&D Beyond, and I'm talking to some of the designers.
A little bit of history. That's the direct conversion of my game, the One Ring, the Lord of the Rings role-playing. This one, and who used an original system, and of course it's still being printed. I mean, we are following two parallel lines, one with the original system and the other one using the conversion to 5e. And that's a much closer interpretation of the One Ring, following the rules for 5e, and it's also, in my opinion, a better adaptation of 5e also to the world of Tolkien. So
Perfect.
everyone will be able to see it when it debuts on D&D Beyond.
What was important to capture when you were like bringing it to 5th edition? Like because D&D can be very broad, but Lord of the Rings has to have like a very specific scope.
Well, for me, being the designer of the original game, I wanted the new version to be closer to the original idea, and that in the end, the new edition achieves what you said, so achieves a translation of an adaptation of 5e to the world of Tolkien, and so it brings from what it is a huge landscape of possibilities that is 5e, Dungeons and Dragons in general. The whole landscape of fantasy needs to be narrowed down, but in a way that doesn't have to feel confining. So you don't have to feel robbed of your opportunities. You have to feel in a different way enabled to feel like you're part of Middle Earth, and that's why we have limitation. That's why magic is not as powerful as it is in D&D. That's why you don't have all the options for creating characters that you have in D&D. All the choices for the rules and for character creation had to be narrowed down to feel like Middle Earth. Otherwise, and it happened in some ways with other games based on Tolkien. Otherwise, what you end up is something that is like just Tolkien flavored, but it's not really Middle Earth. Instead, by limiting the type of cultures that you have in the game, limiting the scope of magic, bringing everything to a sort of a grittier fantasy, you really feel like you're in Middle Earth.
Yeah, so I've been an avid gamer of Adventures in Middle Earth many years ago, so much of the work was pretty much already laid out in that game, so we didn't need to actually do anything new, basically. The adaptation itself for the mechanics was smoother than one could think, because much of the things already had parallels between the two games, even if the systems are actually very different from each other. As you said, Todd, the big difference is probably magic, because of course there's a whole part in Dungeons and Dragons spells and so on that does not really translate into Middle Earth, but that was a challenge that maybe we will explain later. But yeah, bottom line is that the adaptation was less challenging than expected. Also, it was kind of like a return for Dungeons and Dragons to like a primal the primal part of Dungeons and Dragons, like back to the origins, you know.
Absolutely.
Scaling the power down, also lowering the magic, kind of giving like an old school feeling to the stuff, because we are actually going back to the roots of the genre. So that was the approach mainly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna ask a couple of questions. Who are the heroic cultures that players are going to be able to have access to?
One of the things that sets Middle Earth, that makes it different from other settings, is that history is as important as geography. So it's not important simply where your adventures are going to be set. but it's also very important when they are going to be set, because we're talking about a world that has 3 ages. A superheroic first age, and then a second age, and then the third age that is actually when the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit stories are set. We decided with the One Ring, and so with the Lord of the Rings RPG, to set the game between the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. It's a time frame that spans 75 years. And so there's room for lots of adventures and the lives of many characters, or mortal characters, or many adventures even for immortal characters. And so that's one of the things that limited the types of characters that we could do. And the other thing is where the game is set. The game is set in around Eriador. Eriador is the region that is better known by readers of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, because it's where the Shire is, where Rivendell is. It's limited by the Misty Mountains on the east, and so on. So it's an area that is ripe for adventures. And then we have also some hints at what's beyond, like Wilderland and the South. So the heroic cultures that are in the game are Hobbits of the Shire. Of course, you cannot have Middle-earth without hobbits. And we took, of course, hints from The Lord of the Rings that Frodo and Bilbo before him were not the only hobbits to leave the Shire and go to adventures, especially when prompted by people like Gandalf. We have the Rangers of the North, so the Dunedain, the remnants of the glorious Númenóreans. We have elves from Lindon, because that's the elven kingdom that is in Eriador. And so a mixture of high elves and where the Grey Havens are, known by everyone who's seen the movies as the very, very final part of the movie. And then we have dwarves of the House of Durin, because they are connected to Eriador, because they pass through it from the Blue Mountains to the mountain of Erebor. And am I missing somebody? Elves, dwarves, rangers,
The Bardings.
the Bardings. Yeah, we decided to have
Outsiders.
we have to decide the Northmen, the Men of Dale, or the Bardings, because we also have hints well, of course, they are prominent in the Hobbit, because they rebuild the city of Dale after the destruction of Lake Town by Smaug the Dragon at the end of the Hobbit. And they rebuild their city, and we know from the beginning of The Lord of the Rings that they trade throughout Wilderland. They even bring fireworks and stuff to the Shire during the birthday party of Bilbo in the very beginning of the book. And so we have this mixture of characters that they all have reasons to be in Eriador, either because they're traveling through it or because they band together in a fellowship, in a company, and have adventures.
I'm very excited to be able, because it's kind of funny. D&D, once upon a time, did have Balrogs in it, and also hobbits, and then those changed to Baelor and also halflings for reasons. So it's it's full circle to finally be able to play, a hobbit in the game finally, and also maybe fight a Balrog. But we do, despite Lord of the Rings doesn't. You're not going to see super high magic necessarily. Yes. But we do have new spells very specific to, this environment, to this lore, correct?
Yeah. I mean, there's a conversation to have about magic in Middle-earth, and Michele already hinted at the fact that we could not translate directly how magic is handled in D&D to Middle-earth to make justice to what sometimes is called the subtle magic of Middle-earth. So it's not something that is so flashy, so clear and evident, but of course it's present. You can have places that have magical qualities. You have people that have magical qualities, and of course we have the wizards that can do magic. But it is never so flashy or so immediate as it is translated in D&D, but it is still there. So what we did, and I like Michele's description of that, is that we took the approach of how elves describe magic to mortals. It happens in Lorien, where they're trying to explain how the cloaks work, the cloaks that they are given as gifts, they will help them to go unnoticed by the enemy. And the hobbits say, "Are these magic cloaks?" And the elves say, "Yeah, that's what you might call magic. It is simply that they do something so well, what they are created for, they do it so well that can pass as magic." And so we try to do that. And one of the things that we employ is what we call magical successes. That are individuals or things that may allow a character to achieve a magical success. It may be a ring, or it may be an inner quality of a culture, like elves, that allows to have magical successes in some specific fields. So you may have, I don't know, a magic ring of awareness that allows you to have magical successes in awareness. That means that you will be able to see things that are normally invisible, or because it's dark, or because it's cloaked in some other type of magic, like a stealth magic. And so magical successes already do that. And there are many ways you can, even hobbits can have magical successes in some fields.
And you give guidance on all of that. You have, like, whether it's weapons or armor or clothing, you have really great guidance on how to customize this item that you've perhaps given a player that has these magical qualities.
Yeah, I mean, you can create any kind of magical items. The types you see in the movies or you read in the books, you can even create magical rings. So there is a system that is basically a do-it-yourself system for creating your magical items, both weaponry and armor and classical stuff. From D&D, basically, because you still have like +1 weapons and +1 armors, but they have different names and so on. And then you have the other kind of magical items, which are called wondrous items and marvelous artifacts, which are ordinary items that have been turned magical by their craftsman, probably, or by other virtue. And those kind of items allow players to achieve these magical successes, which are essentially automatic success on an ability check with a plus. So you achieve what is normally almost impossible or too nearly impossible, but with an additional twist. So basically the stuff you see in the movie or you read in the book. So Gandalf intimidating Bilbo by seemingly growing large, when he tries to intimidate him back in the Shire, or the back to the magical cloaks of the elves, allowing the hobbits to camouflage in the surroundings. So
Yeah, to basically hide in plain sight. Or even the famous scene where Legolas walks on soft snow, as if it was solid ground. All these things, what we like of the rules for magical successes is that because it's a general rule that allows for all those different supernatural effects, let's call them like that, are too different, are too diversified to actually be modeled in an individual way. Otherwise, you would have like 400 pages just on those. And instead, we have a specific rule that allows all that. But there's more. I mean, we have also one thing, about magical items and especially weapons and armor. One of the things we like that works very well for Tolkien is the fact that you don't happen simply on magical items. You don't just find them randomly. There's a way that the game master has to engineer them in the campaign. So you as the DM, you basically create the items that you want your characters to find eventually, and that's tied to the theme because you are fated to find them. So it's like the ring, like Bilbo was fated to find the One Ring, and so on. So that's something that allows you to time the discovery of magical items for your campaign. Of course, you don't have to be heavy-handed, in a way that everything seems to just happen so perfectly.
That's what's so magical about The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings is every magic item feels like it matters. And that, like you mentioned, it was fated to happen. Even Bilbo finding Sting, they make fun of Sting, saying it looks, like a dagger more than anything else, or whatever. But like Sting is so important to Bilbo's story. I mean, that's the goal, right? When you're running a game for any player, is you want a magic item to feel like this was meant to be for you. It seems like a prevalent theme in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So I love that you captured that in this.
Magical success is already lets you do much of the stuff that you read in the books. So you can already basically mimic anything that happens by virtue of that simple, very simple mechanic. Actually, still it felt a bit sketchy, especially for 5e system. So we added something more on it that is the way that we treat actual spells from Dungeons and Dragons in Lord of the Rings role-playing, which are the crafts. Crafts are basically
the closer things to spells.
Exactly.
In
They
the
seem
game.
like spells, but they're not actually magical. They are just a high level of expertise in a field that lets you do achieve lets you do tasks that are normally impossible to ordinary people. They're not magical. They may seem like magical stuff, but they are not actually. And they were needed for the system, because otherwise, players would either fight or make skill checks. So we needed a third way, something more specific, unique to the setting. So that's how we cherry pick the spells from Dungeons and Dragons, anything that seems appropriate for the setting, and let them be used by players. But we do not say that they are magical. They are just high level of skills. And in conjunction with magical successes, you can actually achieve something that is in the books and in the movies as well. You can create magical items. If you have handcraft, for example, you can inscribe magical runes on items if you have a runecraft, and so on. There's one that I especially like is songcraft, which lets you achieve very, very interesting effects by virtue of song, which is a very important theme in Tolkien's work. So songs in Lord of the Rings have magical properties. Basically, they have this very very important effect on the world. The world itself was created by music, in the Lord of the Rings.
You can turn any game session into a musical if you want to.
Yeah, very true of how Tom Bombadil wields
Yes.
all his magic is so musically based in the book. So we have new callings, which are essentially classes, correct? If you're used to D&D, you think of classes, but in this game, it's callings. What are those callings?
Well,
introduce Francesco?
Oh, just the introduction, and then you go into the technical details, because the reason why they were in the original game is to provide a reason for adventuring, for the character to go on an adventure. Why you're doing it? Why are you invested in something? So that's the what sets you out the door. And we tried to capture all the different facets of adventuring in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And so we're thinking of what was that motivated Thorin Oakenshield to go on an adventure. It was probably treasure. Or what it is for Aragorn, it's probably protecting others. What it is for Boromir is to be a champion, and so on. So we think we found probably we were able to distill the basic elements. That there may be more, but we found it hard to actually find a better division. And so, Michele, if you want to go into specifics.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that while they are treated as classes, there's a subtle difference because a class in Dungeons and Dragons is basically your profession. It's your expertise in the field of combat or magic. In Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings role playing, sorry, it's your calling. It's why you're out there doing the stuff that you're doing. Doing adventures. So it does not only give you proficiencies and so on. It also gives you a very particular thing that is imported actually from the One Ring, which is your shadow path. Your shadow path is basically defines what can go wrong if your calling is that. So how can shadow corrupt you if you're a champion or if you're a messenger or a captain? Your doubt, your fears, anything that is really strictly correlated with your calling. So there's this additional twist. It's not just your profession. It's why you deep inside you go adventuring.
Yeah,
So,
because we try to be to add this psychological twist, because if something is your passion, it may become your obsession, and the same goes for your vocation. If you do something for, let's say you're a warden, so you want to protect people, you may feel the necessity of enforcing your will over that of others because you feel it's for their own safety, for their own good. But that's the what Tolkien considers probably the biggest problem with trying to be good. He says that why the ring would be terrible in the hands of Gandalf, because Gandalf would end up doing badly with the intention of doing good. And for Tolkien, that's even worse than just do evil for the sake of evil, because it's even presumptuous. I mean, I'm doing it for your own good, and you're actually not doing that. You're doing what you want. And so the shadow paths are the perversion of your intention to do good in your calling. So we have 6 callings in the game, and they are captain. It's when you're a leader of men, so you try to lead by example, and it's when there's a moment of crisis, somebody has to stand up and show the path to others. We have champion, that is someone who instead uses its own strength to do something, even by its own. Messenger, I don't remember. It's somebody who believes that bringing people together is going to be the best way to fight the enemy, the shadow. And the scholar is the one who believes that it's always important to know more about things, so discover hidden secrets and to fill those white sections of a map where you don't know what it's beyond your borders. Treasure hunter is not simply somebody who wants money, but it's somebody who wants to recover lost things. Middle Earth is very much a world where there's 2 ages of the world that have passed, and so there's lost fortresses and palaces and entire cities that have been swallowed by the sea and so on. So there's a lot of stuff to recover. And then Warden is the one who feels that there's the necessity for someone to stand and defend others who cannot defend themselves. So these are the 6 callings in the game.
And very established from the books also. Like, it just feels like
Yes.
all of those callings, you know which character would have been that. So it's a nice feeling.
That's a nice game to be played. Yes, you can definitely
Yeah,
recognize.
associate the different characters to the
Also
callings.
because we used we named the features of the callings as things that the protagonists of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit do or say, so you can actually recognize that kind of stuff. And yeah, and of course there are classes. They're they have the same. They have some twist and
Yeah, but the
veterans from-
mechanical workings of those are like classes.
yeah, they are arrayed like classes, no more no less. Veterans from Dungeons and Dragons will of course recognize similarities, for example, between the champion and the fighter, because you cannot go much farther from the base, the baseline. We did try actually to add some twists, the crafts that I mentioned early, or some very original classes like the messenger, the messenger
But
calling.
one of the strengths of Dungeons and Dragons is to have established these fantastic archetypes for adventuring. It's difficult to go very much beyond that, because of course a fighter is a fighter and a rogue and so on. So there's so I don't know if it was I think it was a brilliant creation to identify those archetypes. And maybe after so many years, some of them are so ingrained in the mentality of whoever plays any type of role-playing game, either on a computer or tabletop. They're so fantastic.
And you can also have more than one calling potentially if you want. But there's also, we've got like a reward list. We've got a virtues list. And then we have cultural virtues specifically. Can you tell me a little bit about that, about the reward system that is in place?
Yeah.
Originally, just a small introduction. What I wanted to do with the original, it was to give two ways of improving a character mainly. And one is like more like self-realization. I mean, your character levels up, let's say, and you gain new abilities connected to your culture of origin. And that was done to differentiate the different cultures, even along the advancement of characters, so that you become more and more different from the others because you achieve new abilities. But the other thing that I think was really important to capture the spirit of the Lord of the Rings is that heroes are defined also by the things they have, weapons they wield, or armor and so on. And not everything is found in a barrow or in a dungeon. Things are given to heroes for them to go on adventures, like Adoril, the sword of Aragorn, or it was not found in a barrel, in opposition to Glamdring, for example, the sword of Gandalf, who actually finds it in a troll hole. How convenient. And and so we wanted to have that, to have the possibilities that when you, in front of your culture, you demonstrate your valor, your stature as a hero, they actually give you something to continue on your quests. And so that gave the birth of the mechanics for virtues, that are your inner self-realization, and rewards, that are the ways your culture recognizes your capability as a hero.
Yeah, well, one important concept that we forgot to say about callings is that we chose to set a 10 levels cap, to keep the power level down, to make something that is closer to the book, to give also players a feeling that they are not superheroes, they're not invincible.
Yeah.
But that also called for additional changes, slight changes, at least in the mechanics, so to give players an additional way of feeling their progression through their career as adventurers. So we basically chose to give them also rewards during their 10 level progressions. We give them more virtues, which are basically treated as feats. So they have more concentrated in 10 levels, basically, this does not actually make them much more powerful than an equivalent character in Dungeons and Dragons, but still gives you the feeling that your character is advancing, is progressing, is becoming better, without actually becoming, the kind of elven
Unbeatable.
unbeatable, heroes, first stage heroes, hitting blows with Morgoth himself, or still you will feel that your character will grow to a heroic stature, at least enough heroic to deal with the threats of the third age, except the Balrog, of course.
Maybe.
and that does bring us to something that is iconic to the settings, is that you have stats for these monsters, these very famous creatures you may or may not run into. And certainly there isn't like thousands and thousands of different types of monsters, but like there are iconic, like we've got the orc, we've got the Balrog, we've got all these different creatures that breathe life into this world that are very exciting to have now. And now you can play them.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to say about that is that our game, when I started designing it, my goal was to make a game that is as adherent and faithful to the sources as possible. Other games in the past took more liberties with the canonical sources. And it was my own experience that when they strayed too far, for me, it stopped being Middle Earth. And I didn't want this to happen with the game, with the One Ring and the Lord of the Rings RPG. So everything is canonical and it's based on the writings. We always went so far as using words that appear in the books for everything, for stats, for abilities. They're basically quotes from the book in form of titles and names for skills and so on. So when we applied this to the bestiary of the game, it became a problem because there are not so many monsters. And so there were two ways to approach that. And one is that we have to make the Dungeon Master and the players realize that monsters are not meant to be the monster of the week. Mm-hmm. They're not meant to it's not like when you have the Dungeon Master guide with 300 monsters inside and you can just flip and pick one and place it and make an interesting adventure based on the creature. You have really to try and make those monsters more personalized. There have to be a bigger combination between the adventure and the monsters and so on, so that they don't feel out of place, they feel meaningful and so on. But there's another thing, and that depends on the actual players and the group you're playing with. If they feel comfortable with stretching the limits of canon, you can go beyond that, because you have to keep in mind that Tolkien himself invented monsters all the time, whenever he needed one. So if he could have written a sequel to The Lord of the Rings, he would have invented more, and we would have a wider mystery in The Lord of the Rings, because he created the Old Man Willow when he needed that, the Barrow Wights when he needed those, the Watcher in the Water because he needed a monster in the lake, and so on. So if you want, you can do that. We even have rules for nameless creatures that are a sort of a kit bash system to put together different monsters whenever you need them, underground, over the ground, and so on. So that really depends on how comfortable you feel with creating and adding new stuff, instead of us doing it for you so that you don't. I mean, I remember in first edition of the game, we had basilisks in a valley in Wilderland. And that had people feeling that really comfortable with that. So we're trying to avoid that type of pitfalls in the new edition and be as close as possible. So far, it seems we succeeded. So
and that's
you
so
find
important.
plenty of monsters, but still canonical.
Yeah, and that's so important because the suspension of disbelief, like the feeling of this world is real, is so important. And if you throw things into this world, and it's the Lord of the Rings, you likely very much love this setting, and you want to feel the magic of that setting. If a monster doesn't belong, or an idea doesn't belong, that makes you no longer believe in the game itself that you're playing with you
Yeah,
and your friends. And so
absolutely.
it's very important to like keep that focus, like when we're talking about magic, when we're talking about spells or magical items, to make it feel like this is part of these books and this world. And that's like the most important thing that people are chasing when you're doing role playing in a game like this. At least I feel that way. We also have like rules for shadow points, correct? Because the shadow is something very important to this world.
The shadow is a mechanism that we imported straight from the One Ring, and that was essential for the setting because we have the feeling of we want to give the feeling of fallible heroes. Is that a word? Fallible heroes?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah,
Fallible.
absolutely.
Sorry.
Flawed
Flawed,
heroes.
yeah, valuable or flawed,
Heroes,
either.
exactly. So we have plenty of examples of such heroes in the Lord of the Rings, of course. I mean, the mind goes immediately to Boromir, but even the future king Aragorn. Spoiler alert for even the future king had doubts, had flaws. He was uncertain, and he was very harsh with himself. So we needed something to describe all of that, and that's shadow points essentially. They do not actually measure how much your character falls into evil, because that's not what they are for. I mean, you can role play your character falling into evil by effect of shadow points, but they're actually something else. They are anguish, they are doubt, they are anything that makes you fearful of whatever is out there, of the greater evil, that eventually maybe will triumph if you fail. So all of that needed to be put in the Lord of the Rings Roleplaying as much as it's present in the One Ring, and it's something that goes in parallel as your advancement, the advancement of your character, because your character will become more powerful, will gain experience, but he will also become more and more flawed and scarred, mentally scarred, emotionally, existentially scarred by what he lives. So at some point, eventually, even if he's going to achieve great deeds and so on, he will need to retire from adventuring. The shadow, the burden will be too much, and we wanted for that to happen eventually, because we were also aiming at a bigger scale of adventures. As Francesco told at the start of this conversation, and the adventures, the campaign, you can span over many years. We have 75 years between the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. So we want characters to evolve, to get old, to and also get weary, basically,
Of the world.
of the harsh life of adventures. Elves especially get weary of the world and sail to the west. So that's a very, very important and very present theme in Lord of the Rings. So you have shadow points that
And they simulate that. One of the
you
things
got
that
emulate and so on.
One of the things that I'd like to point out, because it was a problem with some players in the beginning of the game in first edition, that shadow points are not some sort of chaotic corruption. They're not the type of corruption points you have in Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing, for example, where you sprout arms out of your back. And
Right,
stuff like
absolutely, yeah.
So players were very game masters, especially, they were scared to give away shadow points to players because they felt like, oh, I'm ruining their characters, and they will stop to play the game because they don't like to be flawed. But actually, that's absolutely not the case. It's something that makes the game more interesting because it adds layers of believability to the characters. Again, as Michele said, Aragorn almost despised the people of Bree because they called him Strider. They gave him names. They didn't know he was working for them, and that's a demonstration of his shadow weakness. The fact that by protecting somebody, you can patronize them eventually because you feel they're so weak. I need to protect them, and that's something that doesn't make you evil. It simply makes you more fragile, and that's a part of the game because something that Tolkien has been accused of being too black and white. Everyone is either good or bad. That's absolutely not the case. It's a world, Middle Earth, where the shadow and evil is incarnate. There is actually somebody who's evil itself, and it's Sauron, even if it's not like that anything. I mean, he was good before, but anyway.
But there's plenty of temptation there, like Galadriel and Gandalf
temptation
and
is
all
the
of
word.
them. Yeah.
Temptation is the word. Everybody is prone to temptation and could fall to temptation, and falling into temptation is not the end. You can always do something and be back. Even Boromir recovered in the end by dying with the ultimate sacrifice, but but it was never evil.
Yeah.
That's the point.
This, beyond all the mechanics and the items, the callings, all of the systems that are in place that bring this world to life, this is also just a great glossary of information. So you go into the world, like you go into the Shire, you go into Breeland and the North Downs, the Enmores, Mount Graham. You have information for whoever's running this game to read up on. So it's just a nice read. And then you've got the appendix as well, where you go into Bilbo Baggins and Gandalf the Grey and give information and guidance about those characters. You've got rumor, background, locations, schemes, and trouble, and guidance on how like these adventures get kind of given to the players as well. That feels true to the books.
What we wanted to do, was to make the game as useful to the players in a very user-friendly way. So we avoided to make a 400 pages book or to cram it with too much lore. Also because all the lore you need, it's in the books. It's in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. You don't really need something more than that. But we presented the information from those books in a way that is easily referenced, and so you can just find some information about a place or somebody or about an individual. Of course, we widened the information based on every scrap of information we could find from any source, from letters and from scholarly treatises on Tolkien and so on. So we tried to expand, also going to the point of using sources that we know that Tolkien liked. For example, we have an expansion called Peoples of Wilderland that has also the Woodmen of Mirkwood in it as a playbook culture, and the Woodmen of Mirkwood are very much based on the works of William Morris, who was a writer that Tolkien loved, and he wrote stories that seem very much to describe what Tolkien had in mind for the Woodmen. And I'm not the first to find the connection between William Morris and Tolkien. And so it's well documented. And so what I did was to use the details I found in William Morris to fill the gaps in what Tolkien didn't say about the Woodmen. And the end result, when you do this, by combining either other literary references or even history, it's a combination that is really believable. When you read stuff that is not in Tolkien, but it feels like it could be, and so it doesn't feel out of place. And that's why I think that the books are, yes, a fantastic guide to play Middle-earth, but we try to make them as interesting as possible also for people who are not going to play, but are going to just read them because they are Tolkien fans. And that's one of the best examples of that are the maps. The maps that we commissioned to Francesco Mattioli, for example, who's a brilliant cartographer, are some of the best maps I've seen, and so happy to be working with him because he's brilliant. And so far we had from him, we had a full map of Eriador. We had a map of the Shire that again is one of the most complete maps of the Shire out there, because Tolkien didn't compile one of its own, but he had scattered information throughout other writings. So we compiled all of them into a map. Then we have the map for Moria. And that again, Gareth Hanran, who's the designer of the Moria source book, compiled all the written information on the layout of Moria to be able to actually draw a map. And we will have more, of course, from Mattioli, and I know he's working on more stuff in the line, so we'll see more of that.
Perfect.
If
Did you-
I
go ahead.
add something, the user-friendly structure that Francesco mentioned that we use is that of the landmarks, which are a useful tool for the lore master to handle points of interest, basically spread around Middle Earth. That's not anything new. Many games actually use this approach, but we wanted to give the feeling of many small worlds inside the bigger, the wider world of Middle Earth, where players can explore on their own. You go there and do stuff. Basically, you can leave it as a small self-contained adventure. You can link multiple landmarks into a bigger campaign connected by journeys and fellowship phases, downtime, councils with important personalities that you meet along the road and so on. So that's the approach we chose, and we hope it was it's a fresh take on the gameplay of
Yeah, they're a
Dungeons.
good example. Landmarks are exactly an example of what I wanted to achieve with our playable stuff, and is to present lore elements in a way that are immediately usable. Because in the past also with the first edition of the game, we had lengthier source book chapters that, yes, they were extremely useful and possibly interesting, but they were not formatted in a way that could be put immediately to use. They were for the game master to distill and eventually insert in their campaigns. Landmarks are like pill-sized chunks of information because they're immediately useful. You can just use it immediately because there's a rumor that gives that signals the existence of a landmark to the players, so they hear something about it and they may decide to go there and see it, or maybe not, maybe later. Maybe later they will hear something more about it and then decide to go there and see it. And the landmark itself has everything inside its description to use it as a one shot or longer adventure. Or again, as Michele said, you can connect the dots, connect the landmarks into a wider campaign.
And also, it's the ideal format to explore Middle Earth, because I remember from the playtesting that some of the best players were those who actually didn't know anything about Middle Earth, because if you read the books, the Lord of the Rings, but also the Hobbit, most people living in Middle Earth don't actually know much about the world they live in. They
Yeah.
don't know about their immediate reality, let's say. So giving this approach where you actually go there and discover stuff for the first time, both you as a player and your character, that's a great way to explore Middle Earth. That doesn't steal the pleasure of exploration, of discovery, which is a very much a very important theme in the world, in the books of Tolkien, in general, in fantasy in fantasy literature.
This is my final question. Why do you all love the Lord of the Rings so much?
Many people actually approach the works of Tolkien like me. It's not just like a comfort zone, back to the roots. It actually has something new every time I read it. Because I needed to go back to the books for the Lord of the Rings role playing, and each time I did that, I found something new. Anything I'm reading in between the lines, or some sentence that I didn't notice before, or a deeper meaning. So somehow it still represents a well, a source of imagination, of inspiration, that seems, at least for me, to never fade, to never run out. So of course, the fantasy genre has evolved and has assumed infinite declinations, but sometimes it just feels good to go back home, where you find this very, very knowledgeable and interesting old man called called Tolkien. Talking to you about things that really seems to have happened sometime, somewhere, and you go along with the story. You always are happy to hear those stories.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, in my case, I think that the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien in general has been with me most of my life, and because I read, I think, the books when I was very young, and then continued to read it once in a while. I was never a scholar. I mean, I never studied them until maybe a couple of decades ago already now. I started to study Tolkien more when I was working on The War of the Ring, the strategy game that we published in 2004 and still being published. And because, of course, we needed to go into deep, and then more when I started working on The One Ring. But I think that, to me, Tolkien embodies very much my ideal of fantasy, something that is really entrenched, deeply rooted in reality. Tolkien said of his own creation that in his world, miles are miles, to say that everything needs to be coherent, everything needs to be explained, even if it's magic. So, for example, he was talking about the Nazgul. They could not fly from one place to another place in an instant. He needed to think how long it would take for them to fly from, I don't know, Isengard to Dol Guldur or whatever, and so that's something that fascinates me. The idea that you can build something that is absolutely fantastical, but at the same time feels so believable. And so the game had to feel like that. Everything needed to feel some role, some scope, all the mechanics needed to be there for some reason. Just to make an example, another book that I feel is amazing from exactly the same point of view is this book by Susanna Clarke, the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. That has exactly the same feeling, the thing of a world that might exist because it's so perfectly built, so well constructed. And so
incredibly grounded. Yeah, like
incredibly grounded.
Yeah,
yes.
I actually quite like the series as well. For that, like everything feels almost scientific in the way that magic occurs.
And in Tolkien, that's the same. Even if everything, you can have almost everything because you have celestial beings incarnate, you have monsters from subterranean worlds, and you have orcs and wraiths and ghosts. You have everything, but everything has an explanation and a reason to be there, and that's something that is amazing. And that's even possibly more important even for a role-playing game. Exactly for what you said before, Todd, the suspension of disbelief. In a role-playing game, with any setting, it needs to be plausible, whatever happens. It may be more fantastical because it's in Forgotten Realms, for example, but less fantastical if it's in Middle-earth. But still, it needs to obey some rules. And the rules of Middle-earth, as Tolkien dictated them, are perfect, so clear.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for bringing this compendium, the Lord of the Rings role-playing game to D&D Beyond. I'm very excited for people to be able to like access that with all our tools. Thank you so much for your time. I am a giant Lord of the Rings nerd, so this was a delight to talk to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Todd.
Right.
Thank you very much.